Hi everyone, my name is Ebru Sıla TEK and I am a freshman student in Bilkent University and my department is Industrial Engineering. Today I will present my Physics 101 lab project. The aim of this experiment is to compare static and kinetic friction and investigate the variables on which friction depends. These are my equipments which I used for this experiment. For the experimental setup, I used an inclined plane at two different lengths, 100 cm and 60 cm, which I measured carefully using a ruler. To test different scenarios, I had three different weights, 524 grams, 942 grams, and 110 grams. I weighed each of them using a precision. To measure the motion time, I used a phone stopwatch. Finally, I used a protractor to set the correct inclination angles, and a metal support was used to keep the angles stable throughout this experiment. Now I want to introduce steps of my experiment. The goal of the first step was to determine and compare the coefficients of static and kinetic friction. To do this, I used a 524-gram object on a 1 meter long inclined plane. I tested the system by changing the angle of the plane to 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10 degrees respectively. The object did not slide during the first two trials, but it began to move, albeit slowly, at 7 degrees. To minimize experimental errors, I repeated the specific step 4 times. After recording the data, I analyzed the forces acting on the objects at these angles and decomposed them into their components. Using these equations, I calculated the friction forces acting on the object. By using these values and the normal force, I determined the coefficients of friction. As expected, the static friction increased depending on the applied force, while the kinetic friction remained constant. The objective of the second part was to demonstrate the relationship between normal force and friction force. In this step, I kept the angle of the inclined plane constant at 10 degrees and varied the normal force by using different methods. In this stage, I measured the travel times of 4 different methods as they slide down the inclined plane. By applying kinematics and Newton equations, I calculated the kinetic friction for each case. The resulting data is shown here. As I expected, the results confirm that the friction force is directly proportional to the normal force. Although it was challenging to achieve perfectly accurate results due to surface roughness and measurement errors, the comparison between static and kinetic friction was consistent with the laws of physics. Additionally, the relationship between friction and the normal force was directly proportional as expected. In summary, in this experiment, I investigated the relationship between kinetic and static friction and effects of normal force on friction. Thank you for watching.